Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about the Detroit Pistons because they are apparently looking for a new general manager or a head of their front office to help them kind of move forward into what's probably going to be a very new era of Pistons basketball. So we're going to be talking about some of the issues they've had in the past, what their roster looks like right now, where they could go from here, all those different kinds of things moving forward for the Detroit Pistons. But really quickly, before we get started, if you enjoy the NBA, then consider subscribing. I upload every single day. Okay, so like I said in the intro, the Pistons are looking for some help in the front office, and it hasn't been a great handful of years for the Pistons in terms of front office moves. Really, it hasn't been a great last decade or so. They haven't made very many moves that have worked out well, and a lot of that is situational. And the thing that I continue to go back to with this current era is the Blake Griffin trade. And that was really just a situation where Stan Van Gundy kind of took one last big swing and trying to make the postseason and trying to turn around his career record with that team to try and keep his job. And ultimately, it kind of sunk some of the future hopes of this team because now you're looking at a roster that has Blake Griffin under contract for 2 more seasons after this one, a player option on that last year that he's definitely going to accept. And so if they can't find a trade partner for this guy, then they're going to be, using up $36+ million for the next 2 seasons on a player that I'm not fully confident is ever going to be healthy again. And it's such a weird situation because of how quickly things change for Blake Griffin. Because if we're talking about this time last year, or this time 14 months ago, Blake Griffin was a 3rd-team All-NBA caliber player and broke down in the postseason and had some injury issues later on in the year, but had a fully healthy season for the most part up until the late part of the year and was awesome. Had one of the best years that he's had in a really, really long time. But now, this past season, he barely played. When he did play, he was awful, and he's 31 years old now, and he's a guy that's had a lot of injury issues throughout his career, and I kind of think that he's done. I don't know if that's too pessimistic of a mindset, but that's just kind of where I'm at, and that makes the options for this team moving forward difficult, in addition to the fact that there's just not a lot of young talent, not a lot of assets working for them with this group. So quickly, let's look at and see what they're working with here. So first, I have to point out the fact that they're running like a 2012 starting 5 in their, guys that they're still paying that aren't on the roster section on Basketball Reference. Reggie Jackson, $17 million this year, they bought him out. Josh Smith still paid $5 million by the Detroit Pistons this season. Markieff Morris is another guy that's on there. Tim Frazier, who, can be in the rotation at least. Joe Johnson, also there. They've got 4 or 5 guys that can legitimately play if this was 2013 on their roster in their, actually not on the roster but being paid section, which is just ridiculous. Their dead money section is the phrase I'm trying to come up with there. But the bigger issue, again, as I mentioned, is just, the payroll stuff isn't great, but even if, for example, the Blake Griffin contract wasn't there, what exactly are they building around at this point is really questionable. And this is a 20-win team, so you would expect, there to be some kind of direction moving forward, and you could say, hey, we want to build around this guy. They don't really have that guy. I mean, Luke Kennard is good, had a good season, but he's also going to be a free agent in 2021, a restricted free agent, and you would imagine that because he's still young and he's still developing and he's had some good seasons, he's going to demand a good amount of money, so they're going to have to pay up to retain him or trade him or just let him walk. And then you've got Sekou Doumbouya, who is their most recent first-round pick, who showed some promise certainly later in the season once Blake Griffin and some other guys and Andre Drummond and Reggie Jackson weren't kind of their quote-unquote stars, weren't a part of the roster anymore. They, started to give him more opportunities and things look good. And then the other guy to talk about here is Christian Wood, who's a free agent this offseason and had a really strong finish to the season. I've talked about him. He's had his own videos on this channel. And if he can be a real piece for them, that would be pretty huge, right? And so really the path for this team is trying to get some kind of high draft pick in this draft class, hoping they can continue to develop guys like Kennard, Doumbouya, and hopefully Christian Wood if they can bring him back in free agency, and then just kind of seeing what happens from there. Because even if they're able to unload Blake Griffin and find a trade partner for him, which in my opinion is extremely unlikely. I mean, I could do a trade machine episode about Blake Griffin if I wanted to, but he's one of the most difficult players to trade at the moment because of how big his contract is, because of the injury issues that he's had lately. Now, to be fair, we've seen a ton of big contracts moved in the NBA lately, whether it's Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, even someone like Mike Conley, that have had similar contract numbers to Blake Griffin, some of them even on longer-term contracts than him. But I really find it hard to believe that we're going to see a productive Blake Griffin in these next 2 years. And so you're basically asking a team to take a chance on him with a $36+ million a year price tag attached to it. So I find that unlikely. But let's just say even if they're able to dump his contract, get some expirings, have a ton of cap space in the summer 2021, this isn't a free agency destination. People aren't dying to go and play in Detroit. They have one of the lower attendance numbers in the league consistently over the last 10 years, even when they've actually been pretty good. And there's nothing to be excited about to play with there, as I said, unless you're talking about Doumbouya, Luke Kennard, or potentially Christian Wood. And those are all really big issues, which is why I think that this is one of the worst potential rebuild situations, honestly, in the entire league, because pretty much every team, when they're going into a rebuild or they're in the midst of one, they have someone that they can build around. They can point to a player and say, okay, this is our focal point. And this team just doesn't have that, and it's unlikely that they're going to find that in this 2020 draft. I mean, they're probably going to have a high pick, and they're going to have an opportunity at least to try and find a good player at the top. But this is not a strong class in terms of star power. It's got a good amount of depth to it, so if they're in the top 10, they're probably going to get a good, solid player. But the odds of that player becoming a future All-Star are unlikely, which is a longer way of saying this team is in it for the long haul as it relates to a rebuild. Unless they can pull off some sort of like James Harden-like trade, not obviously trading for James Harden now, but we're going back to when the Rockets initially traded for James Harden. Unless they can bring in someone like that that's undervalued on a different team, bring them in and they can be the star, or somehow Luke Kennard or Doumbouya become, just this incredible player all of a sudden, or Christian Wood continues to develop into a potential like borderline all-star caliber player. I don't know. Like, the options are so limited for this group that it's really difficult to see how they move forward from here. For me personally, the path is just one where you have to sit down and you have to be real with yourself and say, we've been either mediocre or bad for like a decade, maybe even 15 years, right? So understand that if that's going to get turned around with the limited assets on this roster, it's going to take some time. Come up with like a 4-year plan and say, okay, this is the number that we're willing to bring Luke Kennard back on. And if it goes over that, we need to look at trading him away. We need to look at, negotiating that number down, whatever it is. We need to have a hard line on, okay, Luke Kennard provides us this much value. We don't want to be paying him $20 million a year, just to win 20 games every single season. We need to prioritize the development of Sekou Doumbouya, see what we have there early while he's on his rookie deal. And same thing with Christian Wood. I think it's absolutely worth bringing him back for a team that's going to have some cap space moving forward. You might as well use it on a player like that, because it's unlikely you're going to find someone with that kind of future potential in free agency. And try and build around those 3 guys, and then whoever you pick in the draft, and just kind of, be as good as you can while also maintaining that high draft position for the next couple of seasons to continue to develop your players, and then spend your money in free agency wisely. Maybe some bigger 1-year contracts as guys that can help your other players develop, or you're taking flyers on younger guys, or you're signing people that you can then trade later on that are on movable deals, because that is what this is going to be about for the next 3 to 4 seasons, is asset accumulation, making sure that you're getting some kind of players that you can build around, and then ideally getting out from under Blake Griffin's contract. That's probably the first step here. They already traded away Andre Drummond for pretty much nothing, just because they didn't want to risk him opting into his player option and putting even more payroll on their roster for this upcoming season. And so now if you can, even just getting rid of Blake Griffin's contract, in my opinion, is a win. Even if you don't get any kind of value, if you do get value, that's a huge win. And then you just move on from there, and you hope that you can find the guy to lead this franchise over the next 3 or 4 seasons. You're hoping that you're not overpaying Christian Wood or a potential Sekou Doumbouya extension or a Luke Kennard extension, and then you're rolling from there. Because the danger here with this group is overpaying one of those 3 guys, or 2 of those 3, or 3 of those 3 players, and a couple of years from now, you've got 3 big contracts on the roster for players that aren't all-stars, and you don't have an all-star or star on this roster, and you're winning 35 to 40 games in Eastern Conference, and you're in the middle. And then when you could have spent those 4 years really doing a proper rebuild, suddenly it's 4 years later and you've gone nowhere and you kind of just have to reset the whole thing again. That's kind of what they did in the Stan Van Gundy era, where they kept pushing and pushing and pushing and adding payroll, bringing in Griffin, re-signing Drummond, bringing in Reggie Jackson a few years before, and they never really were threatening to anybody in any kind of significant way. So this is a complete reset, a complete blow it up situation for me in Detroit. Try and get rid of Blake Griffin, build around those three guys, and accumulate as many assets as possible. We've seen worse teams certainly rebuild. We're thinking about a team like the Nets that didn't have their own draft picks and were able to make some things happen. But even I would argue that in terms of the players on the roster, they had better assets than this Pistons roster does now. And I feel comfortable saying this is the toughest rebuild in the entire league right now, just given the complete lack of assets, the potential contract situation with Blake Griffin, and the limited free agency possibilities as well. And you just kind of have to hope that you're going to strike gold in the draft or with one of those three young players that I continue to talk about in this video. So I understand why the Pistons want to bring in someone else to help them in the front office, because it is going to be a huge, huge job to try and get this done and rebuild this team into any kind of future, playoff contender type team. And yeah, there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.